drove this full budget this year is that area right there, state funding. And as Mr. Beatty indicated, you know, it's decreased. That is the major thing that created everything else to happen. All the other revenue sources were, you know, pretty much the same. We had some pluses and some minuses and that kind of thing. But this percentage here dropped because of the drop in state funding when you compare it back to last year. Last year, this was 36.6% of our total revenue. As you can see, it's about 4.5 percentage points. And so that's the thing that changed all of our thinking and planning for this year. And what that then reflected, and this slide is a little bit different than what you've seen before, is the expenditures for next year. You've seen this one up here in the upper right corner before. Our salaries and benefits still are the largest part of our budget. We're very labor intensive. It's 79% of our budget. If you remember right, that was right at 83% this last year. Primary reason that we did reduce staffing. There was impact there. And also we have shifted costs when we outsourced transportation custodial services out of the payroll area down into the professional contracted services. So that contract that we have now with SSC and Bureau is down here instead of being up here. We most of that out in salaries and benefits. So it shifted around a little bit how we spend our money. This is looking at the same expenditures just a little bit differently. And the reason I pulled this up tonight is I wanted to show you this area right here because people are always concerned about how much money is in the classroom. Now, this one area right here is strictly classroom expenses, 63%. That went up just a little bit. It was just 63.1% last year. And so we've maintained those expenses, the money going into the classroom. We didn't take it out of there. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's what's happened. The clients are coming down in some of these areas down in here, support services, administrative services, and things like that. That's where that was mostly reflected. You've seen this information in other forums. These are just the cuts, various reductions we did in expenditures and increased some of our revenue areas. We did a substantial amount of cutting right down in this area right here. That's the biggest part of the cuts is because of staffing, payroll, benefit costs. That's about $4.3 million that is being impacted by our reduction in payroll costs over here. You know, departments and then campuses, $1.4 million were cut out of their budgets, non-payroll areas. Okay, that were cut out of them, and then our outsourced savings over $1 million there, and then you can see the rest of those items. The health clinic reduction you see there on the very bottom is because now instead of that clinic costing the general fund $700,000 because we're going to the copay and get insurance reimbursement, we're saving $500,000 on that, reducing the cost on that health clinic. All of these decisions had impact, and one of the impacts is that because we're reducing our overall budget, our cost per pupil is declining. And talking to some of my colleagues a couple of days ago, everybody's seeing a similar type deal. And so over the next couple of years, you'll see this continue to decline a little bit each year, as long as that funding is not there. Another impact is that we are doing a deficit budget. So that's going to have an impact upon our fund balances. And I've showed you this a couple of days ago, or earlier this month, I guess, of what that's going to do. Here's where we anticipate ending for this year that we're ending here on June 30th, and then dropping it off and dropping it off. And so we're going to have to manage and watch that fund balance. As you remember on Monday night at your regular meeting, we had a resolution regarding fund balances and GASB 54. And part of the reasoning for that particular accounting statement, and I won't get into too much of the accounting detail, is to give the public more information on fund balances and what we're going to do with those fund balances. And so most of, well, all of this money right here are fund balances that are unassigned. We can use them for operations, okay? But there are some fund balances in the district that we have committed over the years as part of district and board policy. And so there are certain fund balances that we commit that aren't in this fund. Predominantly, those are going to be things like some of these grants we get from the state or federal government. Those will continue to be committed. They're not included here. Okay? Campus activity funds that campuses have from fundraisers and things like that that they use on the campuses, those will remain committed. That is going to be the continuing policy of this district. They're not included here. These are just the unassigned fund balances. The committed funds will continue to be continue to be in those particular special revenue type funds, and we're going to continue that into the future. And that includes the activity funds as well as some of these special revenue grants that the district gets. So the question will be for the future is how we're going to continue to manage this. This is going to take more time and effort as we watch this. Anytime we add an additional expense into the district, that means these numbers start going down. And as you remember, right, when we get to this level right here, that represents 2.8 months of operating expenditures. And Jeff Robert, our financial advisor, last November stated to us we needed to be somewhere between, he said 3, but 2.8 is still close enough to get there. We can round that to 3. And so we got to watch that as we go forward and not to get below these numbers so we can maintain our credit ratings on our bonds. Mr. Bailey did indicate that our tax rate will not change for next year. Goes up to 11.12. So our debt tax rate will remain at 43 cents. I'll show you a little bit of that in just a second. Our operating tax rate will be $1.04, total will be $1.47. This will be the 5th year in a row that we've maintained the same tax rate. And that's been very difficult because our property values for the last 2 years have been basically flat, slight declines. I want to also touch base on a little bit on child nutrition since we passed that budget also. The biggest thing that's happening in child nutrition, and Mrs. Ferris operates that program very well. They're going to make a substantial income this year that we're currently in. As you can see, for next year, it's just barely break even. What's happening here is a change in the revenues shifting more toward the federal side, and that's for the free and reduced lunch program. We're getting more students that are qualifying for that. So it's changing the mix of that revenue. And some of the requirements that are coming up from the federal government are going to change some of the nutritional offerings that we can offer in our cafeterias. And what it's going to do, because of those regulations, it's going to increase our expenses down here. And this area right here is her largest expense.